Hi everybody, this is Dana Childress with the Integrated Training Collaborative, and I want to welcome you to our December Talks on Tuesday webinar. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on really thinking beyond cultural competence. So I hope you were able to join us for part 1 in November. If not, you'll be fine. You'll still be able to follow along today. Our presenter will reference part 1, so I encourage you to go back and listen if you really want to dig a little deeper into this topic. So for the part 1 webinar, that webinar is archived on our Talks on Tuesday page on the 2017 recordings page. In part 1, thanks Jeannie. Jeannie just put that link into the chat so you can see that in the chat box. So part 1, Barbara, our presenter, really talked to us about cultural humility. We talked about defining culture, and we started talking about ways to reflect on your own practices, to think about how to really best serve all families. And I love Barbara's really big picture approach to think about all families and how we reflect our own selves in the services that we provide as well. So today Barbara's going to dig a little deeper, and we're going to, so I want to give you a heads up today that our webinar today is probably not the kind of webinar you can just sort of listen with half of your ear and do other work. I really invite you to pause, to use this time to really dig deeper into your practices, because she's going to challenge you to really think about what you think about what you say, and about the type of work that you do, which is wonderful. I love that kind of webinar. So I think I'm just going to get ready to turn it right over to Barbara. We are delighted again to have Barbara Grant presenting with us. Barbara's going to introduce herself again. She had a recent job change, so Barbara is now working in Washington, D.C., so I think we have folks on our line that are from D.C., so you guys are very lucky to have her, but we're really happy to have her today. So I'm going to turn it up. Christopher Chapman says, yay! So we'll share Barbara for today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Barbara, to take it from here.
Thank you, Dana. Well, thank you and welcome everybody. Hopefully welcome back for those of you who were at part 1. And for those of you who did not listen, I will try not to reference it too much, but do go ahead and feel free to watch that archived webinar whenever you get a chance. So once again, my name is Barbara Grant. I worked with Arlington's Early Intervention Program for a little over 6 years. I started there as an intern. I did service coordination, education, worked as a vision specialist, and then ended my time there as the technical assistance team lead, so doing a lot of trainings and orientations for different folks. And just like Dana said, I recently moved over to DC's Early Intervention Program as one of the supervisors there. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to review a little bit of what we talked about that first section, okay? So we're going to review the 3 dimensions of cultural humility. We're going to identify our own implicit biases in current practice, everybody's favorite topic. And then we're going to try to identify at least one strategy that you all can use immediately, because I know that's really important for us to be able to go ahead and put things into practice right away. So I do want to let you guys know I'm going to be asking a lot of big picture questions today, big questions today. So if you're someone who kind of feels like you need more time to process and reflect, or you're like, I can't possibly answer that question this quickly, Barbara, what are you thinking? Or if you want to share some of these questions with your peers or with your staff, I encourage you to write them down and bring them up later. So just like Dana said, some of this is a big topic, and I encourage you all to reflect on these things later on, okay? So first off, I want to know, for those of you who did listen to part 1, did you do anything differently? After seeing that, did you change anything in your practice? So I'm going to ask you to go ahead and use that raise hand feature. It's going to be underneath your name on the left. That third box with that little hand, go ahead and click on it if you have changed anything in your practice as of the last webinar. So I see one person gone ahead and raised their hand. I'll let you guys take a second if you have done anything differently since last one. And for those of you who have done anything differently, I wonder if anybody would want to share what you did do differently. So go ahead and use that chat box on the left, on the lower left corner, if you want to go ahead and share something that you did do differently since the last webinar. So I see a few people typing. I'm going to let you guys type up your response, and then we'll move on. So once again, just go ahead and use that chat box in the lower left-hand corner if you did do anything differently since that last webinar at the beginning of November. Arlington is saying that they reminded myself to avoid assuming what the family may want or need. That's great. My boss is Jewish. I've asked my staff not to give them Christmas cards. Okay. So Lisa was saying that she's being more mindful of not asking about how their Thanksgiving went or holidays and not assume that the families celebrate these. Those are great things. Thank you guys. For those of you who are new, I'm not saying that you guys don't have to recognize or ask how the family's doing, but it's more about not assuming that everybody is celebrating or doing the same things that you might be doing. Okay, thank you guys for sharing. So hopefully we have a little bit more things that you guys can put into practice after this webinar today. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you guys another question. And it's going to feel like one of those big vague questions, but how do you show respect? If someone was coming to you and said, I need to learn what respect is and how I need to show it, what would you tell them? So go ahead and use that chat box on the left again, lower left-hand corner, and just give me some answers on how you show respect. So I see Barbara went ahead and said that she listens. Now that's huge, right? You have to be open and listening to what other people are saying. Asking for clarification instead of assuming the answer. Awesome. Considering other feelings or beliefs over your own. Valuing the family's perspective. You guys are so great at this. These are awesome answers. So some of the things that we might hear more often also are things like, I follow the golden rule. We always establish eye contact. We treat everybody the same. Arlington is saying acknowledging that my opinion doesn't have to match theirs. I love those. So absolutely, you guys are all on the right track. So what we want to think about is, does everyone really want to be treated the same? No, right? That's not one way that we show respect. We want to treat everyone individually. Is eye contact respectful in all cultures? No. And then going off a little bit of what Arlington was saying, if someone else's ideas are oppressive or if they're developmentally inappropriate, do we still have to respect them? So hopefully we'll dig into that a little bit more today. So another big thing that we took away from last month's webinar is that idea of treating everyone as if they have their own unique culture, right? So that was the big takeaway. So last month I shared a little bit about my personal story, about my family story as a young child. I was born in Mexico and came over to the United States when my mom was about 17 and my dad was 25. And we talked a little bit about what assumptions people might have about a family that is a new immigrant from another country, there's an age difference, a teen mom, things like that. And really talked about how we should come to everybody as if they're bringing in their own unique ideas, their own experiences. So that is what I mean when we say that we treat everyone as if they have their own unique culture, right? And so I was thinking about what to share with you guys, what kind of story to really put that into place with you all today. And what I came up with is how that experience, how my experience growing up has really made me want to treat everyone as if they have their own unique culture, mainly because I know I am someone that doesn't, quote unquote, look like what people expect someone from Mexico to look like. So oftentimes I get a lot of different assumptions placed on me, both when they think that I am maybe not from Mexico and then once they learn that I am from Mexico. So my experiences have really just taught me that we need to treat everyone as if they're bringing something unique to the table. Okay? So let's go over those different dimensions or characteristics of cultural humility. So there are three big ones. The first one is that it is a lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique, developing and nurturing mutually beneficial relationships, and acknowledging power imbalances and inequity. So we're going to go into each one of those a little bit more, just as a reminder. So that first one is lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique. That is one of my favorites because it basically is saying that we don't have to be perfect. There is no expectation on anybody that you need to be the most culturally competent or culturally humble individual at all times because we are constantly learning, okay? So culture is an expression of self, okay? How we identify and how we share our uniqueness with others, that's what makes up our culture, okay? So since that idea is true, since culture is an expression of self, we all need to continue learning our entire life to better understand others, right? It would be really difficult to learn how everybody expresses themselves perfectly in the entire world, okay? So I am giving you guys permission that we don't have to be perfect. This is hard, and we're learning and reflecting and critiquing all the time. Hopefully that helps you guys breathe easier a little bit. So the second thing we talked about was that idea about acknowledging power imbalances and inequity, okay? So what we said is that we need to acknowledge and challenge the power dynamics that exist in the world, okay? So we talked a little bit about why those power imbalances might be present. So it can be because of historical and societal contexts. It could be different identities people have, so race, age, socioeconomic status, class, ability, gender, sexual orientation, all different types of things. We also need to be aware of how those different power imbalances intersect, okay? So I don't just experience things because I'm a woman, right? I experience things because of my age and because of where I was born and because of my job and all different sorts of things. So it just comes back to the idea of all of us having our own unique culture, okay? So that third aspect of cultural humility was the idea of developing and nurturing mutually beneficial relationships, okay? So we know that children all learn best within the context of relationships, right? Children learn best with those relationships with their primary caregivers. We also want to have those good relationships with the people that we are working with, right? So this includes relationships with families and different caregivers, but also everyone that we work and interact with. So those other agencies that come into play in early intervention. So they might be schools, they might be county resources, tons of different things that I could list, right? So we're models for how those good relationships look like and what a good relationship looks like. But we're not only models, okay? So we also need to speak up and notice, and speak up when we notice these power imbalances, right? That's where the mutually beneficial relationship comes in. It's not just a one-way relationship. We get things from them, they get things from us, and then the result of that is that everybody kind of speaks up for each other. We learn how to advocate for each other systemically, okay? So that was a very quick and dirty overview of what we talked about last month, sorry. So today I want to delve into a little bit more of how does coaching fit into this, okay? How does the way that we practice in early intervention fit in? So go ahead and use that chat box again on your left corner and tell me what you think. What do you think? How does coaching fit into this idea of cultural humility? So once again, go ahead and use that chat box in the lower left-hand corner. Take a second to think about it or talk about it with your peers around you, and just give me a little idea. So Fairfax is saying that meeting the family where they're at, absolutely, right? We talked about that a lot. We need to meet everyone where they're at by listening and asking lots of questions, and that sounds a lot like coaching to me, right? I see a couple other people typing, so I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds. So making sure you're not asking families to do something that may be against their culture. So for example, sitting on the floor or using technology, absolutely. So I think what I would like to say about that is that absolutely you don't want to just assume that everybody is going to do things the same way. You need to be open and ask, is it okay if we sit on the floor right now? Or what do you think about using this technology? What do you know about this technology? Because that might answer the question for us, right? They might be like, oh, no, we never sit on the floor. Then you're not going to suggest sitting on the floor. Or we love technology. We use it all the time. Then maybe you can kind of go into that, right? So the thing that I said, how coaching fits in, is that coaching is all about building confidence and competence. And Arlington, you're right. So coaching is relationship-based. So the first part of relationship building is being open to the other person. Absolutely. So if coaching is all about confidence, building confidence and building competence in each other, that's really what cultural humility is about, right? We want to build competence in each other, and how do we do that? By being open, right? So this is coaching. We need to, just like what Fairfax is saying, we need to start where the client is. And this can be hard work, right? Sometimes we don't even want to share information about ourselves with other people. So it's really difficult to expect others to do the same, right? So I want to make sure you guys all know, try to think about how can we make this openness and these questions come from a place of curiosity rather than just an interrogation of who the other person is, right? It's not their responsibility to teach us. We just need to be open. So we need to meet families as a blank slate. We need to let them teach us what's important to them, ask what's important to them, cultivate that strong relationship, and then build their capacity to advocate for what is culturally important to them. And remember again that culturally in this context, it just means what's personally important to them. So let's come up with some examples of what this might look like in early intervention. So I wrote some ideas down here, and I'm going to ask you guys to go ahead and come up with more ideas with me. Okay, so let's start with assessment. So how can we bring in this idea of coaching and cultural humility when we're doing assessments? So we need to make them functional, right? Functional and focus on activities families participate in throughout the day. We don't want to just test the skills. Because if we're testing the skills, that's decontextualized, not functional, and we're assuming a lot about the family. Okay, we're assuming that they have all these toys, that they participate in these types of routines, that they're going to do things like how we expect them to, how that test might expect them to. So what are some ideas you guys have? I see a couple people writing. So letting the family share their activities with their own items at home. Absolutely, I love that idea, right? Because that's really showing that you have confidence in what they're doing at home. You respect that they have their own ideas and their own items, and you want to learn about them. Also, having the assessment in a natural learning environment if possible. Absolutely. So if we're doing the assessment in the clinic, if we're making families come into a clinic, what are we saying about their homes? They might take it in the way that, well, my home isn't good enough to do an assessment. Kids should really only learn in a clinic, right? That might not be what we're thinking, but that might be what they're thinking when we do it, all right? So another part of early intervention, big part, outcomes. So I said that we want to make sure that outcomes are tied to a priority and a routine. We're not going to make goals about what we think the child needs, right? That's not the point. It is not about us as providers. It is about the family. So even if we know that this child maybe needs a lot, we're not going to make goals about everything or outcomes about everything unless it's a priority for that family. Okay? Anybody else have any thoughts about that one? Well, how do you think you can tie in coaching and cultural humility to the idea of outcomes? So again, I see a couple people typing, and I'm going to let you guys take a moment to think about that and answer. So go ahead and use that chat box on the left side of your screen in the lower corner. So we have still thinking about how we can include the ideas of coaching and cultural humility when we're making outcomes. So recognize if you're leading the family into certain outcomes. For example, reading books. We love reading books, but not all families are comfortable with that activity. Thank you so much for bringing that up, right? So a lot of times when we are practicing coaching, we have kind of a hidden agenda. We might be asking the questions, but we're asking questions to guide a family in a certain way, right? So just like you're saying, we might ask questions that we know are going to lead to them saying, oh, well, I guess books, and maybe they don't read books, or that's not something that's important for them, right? So we really shouldn't be guiding people, not only in outcomes, but in services overall. Thank you. I love that. I see a couple more people typing. I'm going to let you guys respond. And again, if these are big questions for you and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't answer right this second, Barbara, what are you thinking? Go ahead and write it down and take it back to your peers and to your staff. So Southside ITC is saying, I have a parent who cannot read on my caseload. I didn't find this out until after the ASP. She confided in me. The mom was too embarrassed to tell the team at the assessment. That's a huge one, right? And imagine if we had make goals about reading or about books, and she just said yes, right? Because she might be embarrassed about them. So that again goes back to that idea of we want questions to come from a place of openness and really, really listen. Not just listen in the sense of what words are coming out, but listen to the whole attitude and atmosphere where we're in. Arlington is saying, can we talk? Well, again, lost in the comments. Can we talk about how to handle things when a family is asking us to write goals that we think are appropriate or decide what services are needed? And then I might assume there is discomfort with collaboration versus prescriptive services is cultural. So I think you did a great job asking that question and talking about it, Arlington. So remember that we're meeting the families where they are, right? We're not here just to make things difficult and to ask questions and say, well, you have to answer it, family. It's coming from you. So I would look more at where we're guiding. So we have been with this family since the beginning. We have a lot of information about their routines and about what they like to do and their hopes and dreams for their child, right? So it really is on that person that is helping facilitate the goals to go ahead and pull some of those ideas into it, right? So that idea of tied to a priority and a routine, we should know what those priority and routines are before we write the outcomes down. Chris is saying that the routine drives the strategy selected, trying not to enter environments with predetermined strategies that may not be applicable to the family routines. Absolutely, absolutely. So that goes back to the idea of guiding, right? Sometimes we might have a list of strategies or outcomes that we know that are helpful, and we kind of try to shoehorn it into a routine. So we want to be doing it opposite, right? We want to be open to routines and not come with preconceived notions about what's going to work for them. So Chris, that just is a great transition for the next idea of services. So I said that each visit should be tied to a family's routine. Start from their priorities. Don't throw strategies that are decontextualized or that you think are important. So just what you were saying, I think a lot of these things can be applied to a lot of pieces of the process in early intervention, right? So let's go ahead and move ahead. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. What ties all of these things together? So all of those ideas that we were just talking about, and I'll let you guys look at it. What is the one common thread that you see in all of these ideas? And if you can think of one, go ahead and write it on the chat box on the left. One thing that ties all of these ideas of how to use cultural humility and coaching. Child needs. That should kind of be the big picture of what's driving us, right? Working in family routines. Yes. sensitivity. So all of these other things are great answers as well. But I was guiding you guys to an answer, so bad on me. But really, it is about routines. So I want to challenge you guys to think of natural learning environment not just as a setting, not just as a place, but as the daily activities and the routines that make up a family's culture. Okay, so that's what we can ask about very easily when we're meeting families and we're working with them. We can ask, what do you like to do? What do you do during the day? What are your daily activities and routines? And those are clues for us on what their culture is. Okay. So let's move on to some of the trickier things. How many of you guys have heard or thought or even said some of these things? Things like, well, the families I work with just don't understand. Or I work with mainly Spanish-speaking families, and they just want us to tell them what to do. Or maybe they won't do the strategies if I'm not there, so I'm just going to do it for them. Okay? So I'm going to ask you guys to use the pointer tool to go ahead and point or click on whatever ones of these you've maybe heard other people say, you've thought of, or maybe you've even said. So to access the pointer tool, look to the left of your slide for the vertical toolbar. The second box from the top usually has like a starburst or maybe a check mark or a smiley face. Click on that box and move your cursor over to the slide. And then you're just going to click your pointer icon on the phrase that you've heard or said before. So we have a couple on, they won't do the strategies if I'm not there. Yeah, I'm a little bit all over the place, right? So these are things that are, unfortunately, they're common, right? So we need to be careful about these things. We need to be careful about how we speak. They may not be coming from a bad place, but it's not coming from a place of trust in the family. Definitely not, right? And that's where we need to be coming from. We need to assume competence in that family. And then the other thing is, remember that the language that we use internally, so the language that we think that we use with our staff bleeds into the language we use with others. So if we're thinking some of these things in our head or saying these things about families, it might bleed into what other staff members say. And then it might bleed into what they're saying with families, right? And we don't want families to think that we're not trusting them. All right, so I just wanted you guys to remember those are some of the challenges that we're coming up against. And so where do these ideas come from? Where do these thoughts come from? So they're from our implicit biases. And I know we've talked about this before. So what are they? Just as a reminder, what are these implicit biases? So they are attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and our decisions in an unconscious manner. So I just want to tell you guys, we all have them. There is not a person in this room, there is not a person in the world who does not have them. This is why it's a process of lifelong learning, right? Because we all have implicit biases. The difference is whether we're acting on them or not, okay? So where do these implicit biases come from? Sometimes we're raised with some of them, right? We like to say that we parent how we are parented. So we act in a way that we learned about when we were growing up. Some come with our education. Some we learn about from our friends. So again, that's why it's really important to surround ourselves with people who are using good language, and we're using that good language because we have a big impact on our friends and the people around us, okay? So take a look at this picture. We've talked about these really hard biases that we have in early childhood, right? So I want you to imagine that you are walking into this family's home right now for the first time. And I'm going to ask you, what feelings or biases may come up for you? Okay, so look at this picture. And what you're going to do is we're going to use the whiteboard tool to go ahead and write what some of the biases or feelings that are rising up in you when you look at this picture, when you walk into this family's house. So to use that whiteboard tool, I'm going to tell you how to do it. So go ahead and look again to that vertical toolbar on the left. It should be next to where you see all the list of names. Look at the box with the uppercase A and 3 small lines. So you're going to click on that box and move your cursor to the side. You're going to click to open a text box, then you're just going to start typing your word or phrase. Okay, so type a word or phrase that describes something we see in this image that may be the source of a bias. So I see some people moving around. I'll let you guys go ahead and type. So some people are saying, I don't see any toys, so maybe I need to bring some. That's a great one. You might be thinking, oh, they celebrate Christmas. All right, so I'm going to let you guys see it again. Thank you for those of you who were answered. We were trying a little bit of a new thing with that whiteboard. Oh, there's a big TV. So let's go to that. So we're biased towards books and toys, right? We don't like the television because of our early interventionists. So go deeper. Take that example of the television, and let's try to think of the reason why having a really big television might be important to the family. I want you guys to go ahead and use that chat box, something that we're all familiar with. Why might having a really big TV be important to a family? Go ahead and use the chat box on the left to go ahead and answer that question. So think about it for a little bit. Talk to your peers. And go ahead. Status symbol. Family DVD night. Yeah. See if a few more people. Visual problems. Too much TV time. So it's time for a family to gather for quality time. Learning. That might be how the parents de-stress or connect. Use the TV to help the child learn English. These are such great responses. You guys are awesome. So yeah, those are all really good examples, right? So it might be exposure to another language, like what Dana was saying. So remember that in this country, English is the language of power. Everybody who's in a prominent position in this country speaks English, right? So if you're a family who doesn't speak English and you want your child to do well, maybe you're thinking, oh, well, the TV has educational programs and it speaks better English than I do. So I'm going to help my child learn that because I want to give them the best possible, right? It might be teaching them things we don't know. So maybe it's not the language, but maybe we just don't have a lot of schooling. And again, I know that there are these educational programs, so I'm going to put them on. I want my child to be smart. Or maybe it's an expression of love. I had to work really hard to buy this, right? I worked a lot of hours. It's an expensive TV. And look at this cool present that I got my family because I love them and I want them to have the best. So what happens if we don't think about coaching? If instead of going in there and guiding the family to turn the TV off, what can we do that takes in some of those other things into account? What would you do if you walk into a family's home that has a big TV? What kind of questions might you ask? Or what are some ways that you can incorporate a TV that's on all the time into your sessions? So does anybody have any ideas about that? I think we all learn best from each other. I love hearing from you guys. So go ahead and use that chat box on the left if you have any ideas. What can we do instead of guiding the family to turn the TV off? So again, I see a few of you typing. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and answer that. So there are a lot of internet links for learning if their TV is connected to such. I would ask what they would normally do with the TV on if you were not present. Absolutely, right? Because that is their routine. That's what we want to know about. You might be able to use the TV as a tool for communication, so teach words for on or off, their favorite shows, etc. Find out about their favorite shows. That might be really motivating, right? So those are great ideas. So it's not just about the TV, right? That's just a good example because I know most early interventionists feel a little cringe coming on when they see a big TV that's on all the time, right? But I want to encourage you guys to think about that for all of those feelings that come up that might cause you to internally cringe. So I'm going to ask another big question of you guys. Are you aware of your personal biases and assumptions about people with different values than yours? So go ahead and use that raise hand feature if you are aware, if you think you are aware of some of those biases and assumptions that you have. So remember that raise hand feature is going to be underneath your name at the top. It's going to be that third little box with a hand on it. So I see a couple people are raising their hands. So that's hard to do, right? That's the hard part that I'm asking you guys to do, is to go ahead and be aware of those things. So I'll share one bias that I have, because remember, everyone has biases. There's not a person in this room that doesn't. So one bias I have is when I walk into families that have these really, really, really large, beautiful, fancy houses, I kind of assume that they have no money problems and their life is just like a little maybe more perfect than mine. But that is definitely not true, right? Just because someone has a really nice house, or just because someone owns a house, doesn't mean that they don't have financial issues. We don't know where that house came from. We don't know anything about that, right? So that's something that I am constantly reflecting on. And I encourage you guys to reflect on those things too. So Arlington is saying, sometimes I'm aware in retrospect, but not in the moment. Yeah, it's really hard to do it in the moment. So one thing I like to say to people is that you don't have to be talking all the time or asking questions all the time. You can take moments to pause when you're with families and reflect in the moment, okay? So here comes another big question. Are there situations in which you find it hard to relate to some families or caregivers? Or maybe you've noticed that some families are less likely to confide in you than in other staff members. Okay, so I'm going to repeat those. Are there situations in which you find it hard to relate to some families or caregivers? Or have you noticed that some families are less likely to confide in you than in other staff members? So I want you to take a second to think about that. And go ahead and use that chat box on the left to answer, why might this be? Why is it hard? And again, it's a big question. So if you guys can't really verbalize it or type it into chat box right now, that's fine. I encourage you to write those questions down and reflect on them. Communication styles. Yeah, absolutely. It could be that you guys have different communication styles, and that is an aspect I would challenge you, and I believe that's an aspect of someone's personal culture, how they communicate, right? So maybe I am really outgoing and I talk a lot, and the family is not, and we are just kind of clashing. So they might not feel like they want to confide in me, right? As early interventionists, we need to kind of learn how to read other people's communication styles and maybe how to adjust our own communication depending on the family. How well you listen actively. Absolutely. Maybe listening actively is something that's hard and something you need to work on a little bit. Okay? So again, if you're still processing that and you're like, I can't think of any of my biases. I don't know why people might think that. But maybe I know people do confide in others more than me. I want you to reflect on it. I want you to take that with you, and in the next couple days and weeks, just think about it. Talk about it with someone else. Okay? So what can we do? What can we do? We're already taking the first steps, so good job, you awesome people. You are already here actively trying to learn more about how to work with all families, right? You're already trying to be a lifelong learner, so good job. So let's think about some specific strategies that you guys can do, okay? So learn more constantly. I've talked about this a lot, and I'm going to keep talking about it. So don't just memorize a list of facts. That's not going to cut it. I want you to read. I want you to watch movies. Talk to people that are different than you. Surround yourself with people that are different than you, that have a different culture. But don't expect others to teach you about their own culture and power imbalances. That is not their job. That is your job, right? So that is why you have to be the agent of change. You have to go out and learn more. Don't expect others to teach you. Some people may want to, and that's fine. Some people might not. That doesn't mean you get to not learn about them. That means you're going to learn about them in a different way. Reflect by yourself and with your peers. There are so many resources available to do this. So many things, okay? You can use checklists, so like the checklist that I shared at the last webinar. You can read articles together and talk about it afterwards. You can do case studies. You can pick an implicit bias that you think someone else might have and figure out how to learn where it came from. There's tons of ideas on how to do this, all right? So you need to be doing that. Build relationships by asking questions. Okay, so we don't do coaching because we have to or because the state tells us to. We do it because it builds competence in others, and it allows us to build relationships based on trust and communication. And again, how do children learn best? Within the context of good relationships. Okay, so again, remember, we don't want the questions to feel like an interrogation. We want the questions to come from a place of openness, okay? And Arlington, I see your examples over there, and I will read them in a sec. The last thing on here is that your staff should reflect your community. So remember that we advocate systemically. Talk to your supervisor. If you look around the room and you think your staff does not reflect your community, if you think that your hiring processes aren't reflective of your entire community, talk to them, and maybe you guys can brainstorm some ways to make that happen. So Arlington has 2 examples here. It says, when I was a service coordinator, I had 3 different families. All lived in huge houses, and all 3 families confided more in their therapist than in me. I think this may have been impacted by my bias that they didn't need as much help. Yeah. So absolutely, that's similar to what I was sharing, right? Maybe you're like, well, they're fine. They got a big fancy house. Absolutely. And then the second example is that it's hard to relate when a family isn't worried at all about their 2.5-year-old who isn't talking. It's hard to sit with my worry and their lack of worry. I love that example, right? Because it doesn't mean that that family doesn't love or care for their child, right? They might have other things that they're thinking about. They might have seen other children that also are at the same developmental age level, so they're like, what are you thinking? What are you talking about? Those are great examples. So one last question for you guys, and go ahead and use that chat box on the left to go ahead and answer. Do you guys have any ideas of other strategies that you can use to grow in this idea of cultural humility? Something that maybe we haven't talked about, or something that you would like to do with your staff or with yourself. So go ahead and take a second to think about that. And when you're ready, use that chat box on the left to go ahead and share. Again, I think that we do learn really well from each other. So it's great to hear examples from people. I see a couple people typing. I'm going to give you guys a few seconds. So Southside ITC said, we've just started asking our parents and families instead of guessing. This allows them to tell us what their expectations are of us. That's great. And that, that's the other thing. It doesn't have to be a big, huge change that you're doing, right? It's more of an internal shift. And so something like asking questions instead of assuming or guessing is a really good strategy. Dana is saying, keeping in mind that culture means more than race and ethnicity. Talking among staff about your other cultural influences in your community. So it might be a mining community or a military community. Absolutely. Thank you, Dana. And then Corey is saying that it's not a new strategy, but just wanted to reconfirm. Ask, learn, and grow. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to open it up right now to any questions that you guys have. Anything that you might want to learn more about or that you were confused about today. I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds to go ahead and use that chat box on the left-hand side if you have any questions. And if not, know that you can still reach us. You can still contact Dana or Jeannie or myself with any questions you might have. But I just wanted to say thank you guys. Thank you again for coming to this webinar, to the first or the second parts of these webinars. If you haven't listened to the first part, I again encourage you to do so. And I just want again to say thank you, because I do think you guys are doing such important work, and just the fact that you came to this webinar today shows me that you want to keep learning and reflecting and growing and being able to give our families the best work possible, right? So thank you guys. We're out a little early today, but that's all it for me. So thank you.
Thanks,
and
Barbara.
thank you, Jeannie, for that link to last month's. Awesome.
Yes, absolutely. Barbara, I was thinking maybe if you don't mind typing into chat your email address, that way if anybody wanted to reach you, they would have a way to contact you. Folks are also welcome to contact me anytime, and I can certainly forward things on to Barbara as well. Thanks, Barbara. So her email address is in chat.
No problem.
Match that up in case you want to reach her later. We will stay on the webinar just for a few more minutes in case folks are talking about a question and then start typing it in. But while we're waiting, first I want to thank you, Barbara, so much for presenting both sessions with us and for sharing your expertise and your experience with us. I think it's just your experience added another layer to this topic that really I think helps us feel comfortable digging in a little bit and thinking, so thank you. I wanted to let folks know that this webinar, Part 2, will be archived just like Part 1 was, and they're both on the Talks on Tuesday, our Talks on Tuesday page, the 2017 archive, which if you scroll back up in your chat, Jeannie had posted that in there so you can find both. And we encourage you, if you watch this today and you thought, boy, I'd really like the rest of my colleagues or the rest of my staff to watch it, working through the questions that Barbara presents you in both webinars could be a great staff development activity. So think about that. We also have on our Virginia Early Intervention Professional Development Center website, we have a cultural competence topic page where you can find some more information, including, I believe it's, I'm not sure, Barbara, if it's the same checklist that you used last time. I know there's a checklist for sort of self-reflection on the page. So if you wanted to dig in a little bit with your staff or your colleagues about this after the webinar, after both of these, we encourage you to go check that out as well. So that's coming. That's available. I wanted to let you know too is when we finish up today, if you registered for the webinar, you will receive an email that will give you have a link to the survey you'll need to complete in order to get access to your certificate of completion for today. So if there are 3 or 4 of you huddled around one computer and only one person registered, when that person gets the email, he or she can forward it on to the colleagues who watched the webinar together to make sure you each have the opportunity to provide feedback and to receive your certificate. So that will be coming to an email box near you soon. The last thing I wanted to let you know, and Corey's put a reminder in the chat, that we won't be having a Talks on Tuesday in January. We take a break there just because the first Tuesday of the month sometimes overlaps when folks are coming back from the winter break. So we won't be having one. Then our next Talks on Tuesday, I guess we'll resume the first week of February. So keep an eye on the Talks on Tuesday page on our website for the topic and more information about how to register. That information will probably be coming out in mid-January or so. That one will also likely be a two-part webinar. I don't have the topic in front of me, but you'll be seeing some more information about that next year. I think that's about it. Let me go back and double check and see if anybody's typing. I don't see any more comments, so feel free though if something pops into your head after we wrap up today to let me know or let Barbara know. I think that's it for today. You guys get out about 10 minutes early, so go enjoy your time. Have a quick lunch break before your next visit. Thanks for joining us everyone today, and we will see you on Talks on Tuesdays again in the new year. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, y'all.